Hey everyone! For the past year, I have been filming the Thomas section at my local Toys R Us in preparation for a video about the transition process from Thomas Wooden Railway to Thomas Wood. I was planning on recording footage of this controversial transformation from July 2017 to July 2018, so that we could all look back on the changes and see how everything went. Specifically, I was expecting to see Mattel roll out new display pieces and banners and signs to try and hype up Thomas Wood, and ultimately that never happened. This video idea was derailed when Toys R Us announced in March 2018 that they were closing all of their US stores, which was roughly 3/4 of the way through this video study. I filmed a bunch of footage at my local Toys R Us store that I don't want to go to waste. So here's what this video is about. I'm going to document the transition from Thomas Wooden Railway to Thomas Wood up to January 2018 like I planned. And then we'll take a look at the Toys R Us closing process and see how the clearance sales went. Sound good? Alright, let's get started. In July 2017, after months of speculation, it was announced that the Thomas Wooden Railway system was going to be replaced with a new type of wooden train line called Thomas Wood. A lot of people like myself were very skeptical of this change for a number of reasons. Most notably because the promotional pictures for the new line showed cheaper, weirder, and less detailed toys than before. With the onset of Thomas Wood just around the corner, I decided to start filming the Thomas section at my Toys R Us store to document all of the changes that would occur over the next year or so. And this is what happened. So here's my local Toys R Us store that I've gone to since I was a kid, and I'm very sad to say has closed by now. But back in July 2017, it was a much happier and brighter place. In my opinion, the Thomas section here had always been pretty average for a number of years. It never had anything special, but it always had your basic items. Here is just some random footage so that you can get your bearings as to where everything is. Looking at the Thomas section from the main aisle, the Thomas Wooden Railway and Adventures merchandise was usually on the left, and the Trackmaster, My First Thomas, and Minnie's merchandise was on the right. But as you'll see, toys were scattered everywhere and the ranges were commonly mismatched on the shelves. You'll also notice two Thomas and Imaginarium play tables that disappear and rearrange themselves throughout the video. In July 2017, the Thomas Wooden Railway section had been looking pretty depressing for a while. No new merchandise had been added in quite some time, and a lot of what you see here was originally brought to the store in late 2016. All of the cool characters had been picked over long ago, so it was pretty easy to tell which ones were the favorites and which ones weren't. There were a few early 2017 items still for sale, like the new Stanley and Trevor, and some of the updated Steam Team characters, but the Wooden Railway section needed some rejuvenation. In the past, June or July was when the merchandise for the upcoming Thomas movie would start appearing, but it became clear that something was up with the Thomas Wooden Railway line in 2017 when no new Journey Beyond Sodor merchandise had been leaked. Knowing that TWR was on its way out and Wood was coming in, I wanted to document these changes by filming the Thomas section about every 2 months or so. While this originally was a Thomas Wooden Railway focused video, I'm glad I shot some extra footage of the Adventures, Trackmaster, and Mini sections, because it's still interesting to see how that merchandise changed over the next 12 months too. The Take and Play range had just been replaced by Adventures before this video started, so you're going to see some leftover Take and Play items in the first few updates as the months roll on. Most of the remaining Take and Play merch was heavily discounted in order to get it off the shelves, and I ended up finding a Percy set and a Take and Play skiff for 3 cents each, which was definitely a rare anomaly compared to the other discounts that were going on. Ever since its inception, and even today in July 2018, I get the sense that Adventures isn't nearly as popular as Take Along and Take and Play were. Mattel definitely ostracized a big chunk of fans when they exchanged the magnets for plastic couplings. And while the Trackmaster range has been scorned by veteran Thomas fans for being crazy, unrealistic, and cheap, I actually think the Trackmaster toys sell decently well, because I never see them in discount stores like I see Wooden Railway, Take and Play, and Adventure stock. Yes, the new Trackmaster merchandise is inferior to the previous incarnation, but I think the Trackmaster toys look so similar to the previous ones that most kids don't notice or care. When you roll out a new product like Adventures and it can't connect to the Take and Play toys that you just purchased last month, or you introduce Thomas Wood and the trains look visibly different than before, then I think parents and kids are going to be more hesitant to buy them. Trackmaster 2014 to present, on the other hand, looks close enough to pre-2014 Trackmaster that you don't notice a big difference right away until you examine the two eras side by side. Overall, I knew July 2017 was probably going to be the first and only time that Thomas Wood wasn't seen on shelves during this video series, so I was soaking in that classic TWR nostalgia while filming this footage. The big item that Mattel was pushing during this time was the Superstation, and my store did have one in the generic cardboard shipping packaging. I was really focused on filming the Thomas banners and signs because I thought that's what Mattel would change when Thomas Wood rolled around, but as you're going to see, that never happened. So let's jump ahead to a cloudy day in September 2017 when I visited this Toys R Us again and found something truly disturbing. I had seen posts on Twitter from people who had started seeing Thomas Wood out and about for the first time, and I wondered if my Toys R Us was going to be ahead of the curve. Turns out they were. This was the first time that I laid my eyes upon Thomas Wood in the flesh, and like a lot of you out there, I was pretty disgusted and unimpressed. I was hoping that Mattel would have heard the major outcry from parents and Thomas fans alike, that we did not approve of these new changes, and maybe they might send their new toy line back to the drawing board before it was too late. But that ended up not being the case. On this day, there were only 5 Thomas Wood items for sale: Thomas, Percy, Rosie, Victor, and a Snowy James set. It became apparent that the new merchandise was going to be shipped out to each store in waves, and the exact items that each store received were going to be a mystery until they hit the shelves. During this time, a lot of people were defending Thomas Wood on YouTube and social media, which made me pretty upset. I think most people were caught up in the hysteria of a new merchandise line with brand new toys available for purchase, instead of actually thinking of the ramifications that these new toys had. The Thomas Wood invasion had started, and ThomasWoodenRailway's days were numbered. A lot of people thought Red Rosie looked amazing, but I could never get past all of the unpainted parts. While I do think that some of the Wood engines have good faces, the negatives far outweigh the positives, and Thomas Wood was still a horrible change in my opinion. Seeing the new merch right up against their classic painted predecessors in person was enough of a decision maker for me. For what it's worth, the new individual Thomas Wood toys were cheaper than the previous painted ones, but only by a few dollars. At this point, none of the Wood accessory packs had hit the shelves, so Thomas Wood was still the minority in the Thomas aisle. In fact, not a whole lot had changed in this section in the past 2 months since I had last filmed here. I was expecting some Thomas Wood signs and display pieces, or even some brochures to hype up the new brand, but never found any. The Thomas Adventures merchandise, on the other hand, was having a sale at the time, and some of the new Journey Beyond Sodor characters had hit the shelves in August. I was surprised to see this much remaining take-and-play merchandise out and about, but I'm guessing the clearance discounts weren't high enough for anybody to think them worthwhile. The Trackmaster section was the same as Adventures. A lot of the original merchandise from July was still available, but at least there was some JBS stuff to give it a fresh look. The Superstation had finally been unboxed and put up for sale, and you got the feeling that Mattel was already ramping this item up to be their big Christmas hitter for that year. A lot of people have asked me about my thoughts on the Superstation in other videos, and while I'll never buy one for a number of reasons, I do think it is a very important item in Thomas merchandise history. With Mattel trying to get parents to buy Wooden, Adventures, Trackmaster, and Minis toys all at once, you do need a place where all of those ranges can coexist. The Superstation is the meeting ground for all of those toys, and I'm glad it sold as well as it did. Overall, after seeing the new wood stuff roll in, I was starting to believe that September 2017 was the beginning of the end. There was still enough classic Thomas Wooden Railway left for me to feel good about, but none of it was being put up at a discount like I'd seen of the old Taken Place stock in the previous months. I wanted to add as much of the good TWR merch to my collection, but considering none of it was on clearance at Toys R Us, and it was already 30 to 40% more expensive than Amazon and eBay, I decided to leave it on the shelves, and I think a lot of people did the same thing. Why spend more money on an item in a store when it's cheaper online? That thinking is what spelled the end for Toys R Us, but we're not there quite yet. We've got a few months to go, so let's continue on our video journey. Now we've skipped ahead to November 2017, just a few days before Thanksgiving and Black Friday, which is the busiest shopping day of the year. I wanted to film the Thomas section as close to Black Friday as I could so that I could get a glimpse at how prepared Toys R Us and Mattel were. You obviously can't sell any toys from your new Thomas Wood range if there are no toys for sale in the stores. By the looks of it, the Thomas Wood stock had been increased slightly, but it's clear that Mattel's big focus is on the Superstation. That Imaginarium train table had been moved from the aisle, and now we have almost 20 Superstations ready to sell in its place. Looking around at the Wooden, Adventures, Trackmaster, Minis, and My First Thomas sections, there seemed to be a healthy amount of merchandise available for purchase. Most of the pegs were full, and almost all of the shelves were packed all the way back. This may look like a bad thing because there are a lot of toys that need to be sold, but like I mentioned before, the more stock available, the more potential there is for record-breaking sales and profits. At this point, Toys R Us had been in the news during the past few days, and the first glimmer that things may not be all right over in Toyville started to surface. The rumor online was that Toys R Us needed to have some spectacular Black Friday and Christmas shopping sales if they wanted the majority of their stores to remain open next year. Basically, there was a lot riding on this holiday shopping season, and they were taking the proactive stance of filling their shelves with toys so that there would be no way they'd run out of merchandise and potential profits. With that in mind, I was happy to see lots of Thomas toys ready for purchase. Now back to the Thomas Wood items that were available for purchase during November 2017. Remember, there were only 4 engines in one set for sale 2 months ago, so let's see if we've made any improvements. Well, it doesn't look like it. The only new items that I see here are Diesel, Dynamite Ryan, Emily, and 2 more sets. That's it. In a 2-month time span leading up to the biggest shopping time of the year, Mattel had only added 5 more Thomas Wood items for sale in this store. And while I get that every store is different, and it's possible that there may have been some Toys R Us stores out there that had a wider selection than mine, most parents are not going to run around to every different Toys R Us in the area in search for new products. I knew for a fact that some other Toys R Us stores near me had Gordon and James for sale, and some additional sets and accessory packs were out there, but I'm only focusing on this one store in this video, and that's why it's pretty unbelievable that the Thomas Wood stock wasn't any bigger than it was. For what it's worth, the next time that I filmed the Thomas stock for this video was in January 2018, And Toys R Us did restock after Black Friday, and they did put some new wood engines on the pegs like Merlin and Hero and Charlie before Christmas came around. However, like I've mentioned, Black Friday is the busiest shopping day of the year, and both Mattel and Toys R Us missed out on a lot of potential revenue by not getting those new items on the shelves sooner than they did. In other Thomas merchandise news, the new 2017 Minis Advent Calendar was available for purchase for $35, but I waited to buy this until after Christmas when it was discounted down to $5. The adventure section was looking healthy, and the last remnants of the Take and Play era were nearly gone, although there were a few stragglers hanging about. There wasn't anything too special happening in the My First Thomas section, and the Trackmaster area continued to look the same. However, there was a 50% sale going on with the brand new Fiery Rescue set, which was a great deal if you're into gimmicky motorized Thomas sets. And Toys R Us did have some advertising for a classic Toys for Tots campaign that always pops up during the holidays. There were some other Thomas toys that I had never seen before that made an appearance during the lead up to Black Friday, but that really didn't surprise me. Considering how much was at stake for both Toys R Us and Mattel at the time, I didn't mind the crowded section at all. I was just glad that both companies were making an effort to sell Thomas toys during the prime toy selling time of the year, even if they were way behind on the wood merchandise. Now let's skip ahead to a chilly day in January 2018. The holiday shopping craziness had calmed down by now, but there was some more disturbing news on the way. Toys R Us had just announced that they would be closing approximately half of their US store locations. Now, my Toys R Us was not on this early closure list because the whole idea was that Toys R Us would shut down their poorest performing stores in hopes that their successful ones could stay afloat, but that ended up not working. Since the last footage in November 2017, a lot more Thomas Wood items have invaded Toys R Us, specifically the individual engines and accessory packs. Now it was actually starting to look like Mattel was attempting to rebrand one of their major merchandise lines. Before, there was so little of the new merchandise on the shelves that they seemed like a one-off, special edition, limited paint versions of our famous Thomas characters, but now this change seemed for real. However, I'm still bewildered as to why all of these new wood characters weren't on the shelves before Black Friday. That is simply nothing short of poor planning and management by Mattel and Toys R Us. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to finally unveil your new merchandise range after the holidays in January, when everybody's just spent all of their money during Christmas. I think we're starting to see why Toys R Us and Mattel are having such major financial problems. There was a lot of new merchandise that was added, not just in the wood range, but also in Trackmaster as well. A lot of the common Trackmaster characters were starting to arrive with the new 2018 packaging, which was a big upgrade from the previous version in my opinion. Again, there were just a few remaining Take and Play items on the shelves, and most of them were carrying a 50% discount or more on their original prices. In a weird way, the Thomas section felt more disorganized than ever at this moment. There were two dead brands, ThomasWoodenRailway and Take and Play, being sold alongside their successors, Wood and Adventures. Trackmaster engines were getting new packaging, Minis were also receiving a new facelift, and all the while there are still random pieces of merchandise for sale that hadn't sold in the entire 6 months that I've been filming this video. All of the different ranges had invaded each other's sections, and it was becoming hard, even for this veteran Thomas collector, to try and pick out which toys were relevant and which ones weren't. The classic ThomasWoodenRailway items that remained had only been discounted by 10 or 20% at max, which was a huge problem because its successor needs the space on the shelves. In addition, the new wood merchandise looked terrible in comparison to the old TWR stuff that it was replacing, so there was just a lot of conflict going on at this moment. In a weird way, I don't think Mattel was ever in any hurry to remove the old Thomas Wooden Railway merchandise from sight, because they knew it could still sell, but yet they replaced it with wood because they didn't think it was doing well enough. See how confused I am? January 2018 ended up being the last time I did my bi-monthly in-depth look at the Thomas merchandise at my local Toys R Us. In the coming weeks, more information would leak out that Toys R Us was in serious financial trouble and that they were going to be closing all of their US stores for good. Like I said at the beginning of this video, my plan was to shoot footage of the updated Thomas Wood stock until July 2018 to get a look at the year-long transformation, but I was unable to accomplish that because of these surprise closings. At the beginning of the clearance sales, the discounts were so small that they were almost insulting. There was still plenty of classic TWR on the shelves, but even with the discounts, online retailers were still much cheaper. Gradually, the discounts began to climb, and they eventually peaked at the 50% region. By the time the 60 and 70% discounts had rolled around, all of the Thomas merchandise had been cleared out. Those sound like great deals, but remember we're dealing with Trackmaster, Adventures, and Wood here. All three are very cheap toy lines with ever-depreciating quality. 50% off kind of made me feel like I wasn't being ripped off for buying toys anymore. Eventually, the day rolled around when my Toys R Us had to close, and this was the scene. Can you believe this was the same area where I had done all of that filming previously? All of the signs, banners, tables, and display pieces had been sold off, and I was so low on the wait list that I didn't receive anything. This was a pretty surreal experience, to be honest. I had been going to this Toys R Us for my entire life and never thought it would close. While I've always enjoyed shopping in-store, it's hard to pass up an online deal when it's significantly cheaper than a brick-and-mortar location. I tried to support Toys R Us as much as I could. I always checked their stock when a new item came out and bought anything I was remotely interested in during one of their sales. But just like Thomas Wood did to Thomas Wooden Railway, Toys R Us got replaced by the next big thing, and now we must deal with what we are left with. Looking back on all of the filming I did for this video, I'm glad I decided to go through with this idea, and I'm very appreciative I shot as much footage as I did. Toys R Us is gone for now, but there are some rumors floating around that say the company may try to reopen with smaller stores and a different business plan. Honestly, any store that sells Thomas Wooden Railway gets my support, so I would be more than happy to help out in any way I could. However, when it comes to the death of Thomas Wooden Railway, I'm less than satisfied. Obviously, my channel is devoted to this type of merchandise, and I've grown up with Thomas toys, and I really don't like Thomas Wood to say the least. I've hinted at it multiple times during this video, but I believe Thomas Wood is a very poor decision that will haunt Mattel for the foreseeable future. We Thomas fans never asked for half-painted, unfinished toys. There was nothing wrong with classic Thomas Wooden Railway, yet Mattel decided to come in and change everything for no particular reason. Thomas Wood has to be one of the dumbest decisions any company in history has ever made, and that's saying a lot. The only saving grace right now is that, at the time of the making of this video, there are rumors that say Mattel might do a 180 on Thomas Wood and bring back some elements of Thomas Wooden Railway in hopes of getting their customers back. I think that would be an excellent idea, considering the company is in major financial trouble and might go the way of Toys R Us sooner rather than later. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching and listening to this crazy long video. I'm extremely passionate about Thomas Wooden Railway, but I'm also very interested in how the merchandise is sold and promoted to customers. And I believe this type of video sheds a lot of light on how much Toys R Us and Mattel value the Thomas brand. We can only hope that Thomas Wood is simply a fad that goes out of style before it's too late.